All right, that's 7:03, so we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I know it's a beautiful day out there, so we appreciate you tuning in and going virtual with us this evening. I know it's tempting to be out there. I spend most of the day out. But we are thrilled to be welcoming spring with this great presentation about birding in New Canaan, specifically at the New Canaan Land Trust. I actually bumped into one of our presenters, Newell, today at the Calhoun Preserve down on Davenport Ridge Road. We got chatting, and it turns out we're at sort of right at the early phase of the spring migration. And so all the tools and tricks that we're learning today will help you become expert birders over the course of the migration over the coming weeks. As I mentioned, we're thrilled to be joined by Avery and Newell Cotton. They are New Canaan residents. Avery is at the high school, and they are just amazing birders. They've birded all over the world. They spent some time in Singapore. I was talking with them earlier, seen close to, I think it was 500 or 600 different species of birds across the world. And these have also been really instrumental in helping us learn what birds we have at the Land Trust. And so they've observed close to 100 birds at our different Land Trust preserves, and have created eBird hotspots. We'll learn a little bit more about what that means later in the presentation. But yeah, have been a great resource for us to learn more about what's out there, and are now hopefully going to be able to share some of that with you to make you able to go out and see the birds on our properties. Today, Avery and Newell are going to be talking about the Still Pond Preserve, sort of in the Silver Mine neighborhood of New Canaan. But that's just one of about 10 preserves that we have open to the public. A total of 400 acres are protected by the Land Trust. About half of that is open to the public with trails, and you're welcome to go for a walk or go birding or whatever form of passive recreation pleases you. So yeah, we hope that you'll learn or use the skills that you've learned tonight to get out there and enjoy the Land Trust properties. And with that, I'm really excited to turn it over to Newell and Avery. So thanks for joining us, and we'll get going.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Aaron, for inviting us to give this webinar, and also to the New Canaan Library for offering the platform for presenting it. As Aaron mentioned, we've been birding around New Canaan now for about 5 years. We've seen about 100 different species in town, and also additional species in the Fairfield County area. And we got discussing with the Land Trust about the idea of offering a virtual bird walk through one of the Land Trust properties. And we decided to pick Still Pond Preserve, which as we'll see, is the Land Trust property in town that has the most recorded bird species seen so far. So I am going to share my screen here.
Sorry, Newell, one thing before we get started. I forgot to do the usual Zoom housekeeping. I'm sure folks are familiar with it by now, but just so that everybody in the audience knows, if you do want to ask questions, we're going to use the Q&A feature. We have the chat disabled for this webinar, so type your questions. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible. We also have a live transcript option for those who might have difficulty hearing. The transcripts will be automatically created live. You can toggle that on and off on the bottom of the screen. And this webinar will be recorded, so if for some reason you have to tune out, we'll be posting that on our website. So sorry for the interruption, and we'll let you guys get going. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you, Aaron. So I will share my screen. And here we have our cover slide. So we're entitling this a virtual field guide to birding at Still Pond Preserve. And we think there's been a lot of nature-related programming, certainly over the past year under COVID. A lot of people have had to be more local in their recreational activities and getting to learn more about the natural environment in their own town and backyards. So we wanted to focus on one of the Land Trust properties here. We've designed this for beginners, folks that may know something about birding, but want to have more understanding of the tools and resources that are out there to help in bird identification, as well as some of the things that we can see right around here in our neighborhoods. So our agenda tonight will be first a quick framework overview of bird identification, not in depth. Again, we're going to keep this at an introductory level, but some tips and pointers on how to get started and be more informed and observant when you're out there bird watching. Then we're going to go into a virtual bird walk at Still Pond Preserve. We're going to take you through the different habitats that you'll find at the preserve. and discuss some of the species that you're likely to see in the preserve. After that, we're going to give a quick introduction to eBird. And eBird is both a website and an app that are hosted by Cornell's ornithology program. And Cornell University has one of the leading ornithology programs in the world, probably. And eBird is an enormous citizen science database for bird watching data. And it's a great resource when you're learning about birds. Then at the end, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So with that, I'll jump in. And first, with an admission that bird watching can be a challenge. Things are out there, they're not always easy to see. Some of them don't even want to be seen. And there are a lot of visual clues that we can use to identify birds. This is a very kind of a guidebook-like diagram of bird anatomy. Now, do we see all of these things? No. Generally speaking, bird watching, we're trying to find small moving objects in foliage, in shadow, in undergrowth. So this is an idealized diagram of a bird that it's good to know some of the anatomy and the details. They can help with identification. But when you're out there, more likely you have something like this. You have incomplete information, less than ideal conditions. There is a pine warbler here on this vine. Pine warbler is one of the regularly seen warblers in our area. They're starting to show up now, in fact, in our woods. But you can see it's a little bit drab and a little bit at a distance, and these move a lot. So it's not easy when you're out in the field to know what you're looking at. And so we thought about what kind of framework can we give you to use when you're out bird watching in the woods or in other habitats. And this is not a checklist, but a little guideline that we'd like to put out for you. And the first and most obvious one is sight. And so this includes a variety of visual cues. So body shape and size are the first way we can filter out what we see. Is it very large? Is it goose size? Is it turkey size? Is it crow sized? Robin sized? Is it very erect? Is it sort of horizontal in its posture? And that can help you filter out what you might be looking at. Bill shape and size, also important clues. As you know from your evolutionary biology, bill shape evolves based on what the birds are eating. So finches, for example, have thick triangular bills, and seed eaters, depending on what seed, you have different shape of bill. Insect eaters, it's a thinner pointed bill. Woodpeckers, of course, have an elongated bill. And these are things you're going to be able to see on the move, basically. How big was this? Maybe what was its head shape, bill size? So to give an example of that, we have in our woods the downy woodpecker and the hairy woodpecker. And they look very similar. The hairy woodpecker is bigger. It has a longer bill. But when something is 30 feet up in the canopy or hammering against a tree, you might not have a lot of opportunity to see that bill shape or size. It's got even to the extent that if you go on eBird, there is an entry for your postings that's downy/hairy woodpecker. And that's not a hybrid. That's not some kind of a mutant species. That's because somebody's out there and they've been able to narrow it down to one or the other, but they're not sure which one it is. That's a valid data point from an eBird perspective. Additionally, under sight, we have colors and patterns. Colors are interesting because there are color variations between gender. So as an example of that, the red-winged blackbird male, most of you are probably familiar with the black body with the red shoulder patches. The female is the same shape and size, but looks nothing like the male. It's very drab, brown-colored bird. Quite easy to mistake a female red-winged blackbird for other birds of different species. And then we have the issue of color change during season. So the goldfinch, which is a year-round resident here, in the summer, the breeding males are bright yellow and black. But in the winter, they're very drab, olive brown. And we might not realize that that's a goldfinch that's at your feeder, but that's the winter non-breeding color pattern of the goldfinch. Next, we have sound. Sound is really equally important to the visual cues. In many cases, when we're out bird watching, we hear something before we see it. We might never see it. So being able to identify some common bird calls gives you clues of what's out there, and also helps you, again, filter in and maybe identify birds that you haven't seen before. If you know some of the calls of the common birds in our area, then you can just kind of tick those off when you're entering a location. Say, okay, I hear a cardinal. Oh, that's a chickadee. But if you hear something you don't recognize, then you may want to focus in on that particular call, see where that bird is calling from, and maybe you'll see something new. Thirdly, habitat is important. Now, some birds really move across all habitats, but others do have a preference. So for example, in forest and woodland, that's where we're going to see thrushes and veery. And of course, woodpeckers will be active in forest. Meadow is more open spaces. At Still Pond, you'll get to see some of the species that are present in the meadow. But for example, swallows and bluebirds will like to feed or nest in meadows. Sky is an important one because some things are just what we call flyovers, meaning they are something that's soaring or moving through and we don't see them perch or land at all, but you may get a good look. And that goes together nicely with meadow, but also wetland or coast habitats where you don't have much overhead. So you can get a good clear view of the bird, and also a long view, meaning you start to see it and then it makes its trajectory. And as it passes over us, then we have enough time to focus in, start to look at wing beats, wing shape, behavior. Last, under habitat, we've put edge zones. So edge zone to us just means that borderline between two different habitats. And that can often be the most biodiverse habitat of all, because woodland birds are coming out perhaps to feed in the meadow, but they perch back at the edge. It's a mixing spot of all kind of species, of course, not just birds, but plant life and other animals as well. So edge zones are interesting, and they're edge zones at Still Pond, as we'll see. Next, we have location. And by location here, I guess it really means more altitude. So canopy is a place where you're going to see things like great crested flycatchers, maybe flickers perching high up at the tops of trees. Or at this time of year in migration season, warblers may be going across the blooms at the top of some of the deciduous trees and just picking things off at the very top. This is frankly one of the more uncomfortable parts of bird watching is straining and looking at something up overhead, but that's an opportunity to see things that are not going to come down to the mid-levels or the understory. And understory and on the ground, well, that's where we're more likely to see the thrushes, the common yellowthroat that you'll meet later on. Towhees are also in the undergrowth and the leaf litter. Next, quickly, and again, no surprise here, date and time. So we have nocturnal and diurnal birds. We also have seasonal birds. So now we're entering migration season, and we have different waves of species that are starting to arrive in our area. It started in March, it's continuing now and into May. So we have, of course, our year-round residents that you can see any time of year, but if you're out there for warblers or vireos, now is starting to be that season. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've noticed the grackles are coming back, the chipping sparrows, the kinglets, and now the warblers are beginning. Next to last, behavior. Behavior is perhaps less key for the identification, but it can be fun to just observe bird behavior in the wild. There's feeding behavior, of course, gathering for a nest. The third one, mobbing, is a nice clue to something interesting going on in the area, because if there's a swarm of birds that are flying around causing a ruckus, that might be a hint that there's an owl perched in the area, or a raptor on a branch, or some kind of an intruder. So anything like that is worth a pause, and just see if you can figure out what's causing the commotion. And then finally, under behavior, skulking. So that's the undergrowth birds. There's definitely some birds that don't really want to be seen. And our impression is they do see us, before we see them. So if they're aware of you, you would need to really slow down, be mindful of the fact that something's in the area, and try to patiently wait out that bird, because sooner or later it is going to want to move on to another spot. Lastly, identification tools. Tonight we'll talk about the eBird website. Of course, there's a variety of good books. There are other apps such as the Merlin app that's useful for bird identification. And last but certainly not least is experts. So we're fortunate even in New Canaan to have some really master birders, we might say, career naturalists who have seen hundreds of species around Connecticut and are very generous about helping with identifications, even for Avery and I. Sometimes we send a photo out to someone and say, well, what is this? And people are very generous with their expertise. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Avery now to lead us on our virtual bird walk and start with the habitats.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Avery. I'm a freshman at New Canaan High. And today I'm going to give you a virtual bird watching tour of the Still Pond Preserve. So for my portion of the presentation, I'll run you through the different habitats of Still Pond, as well as the species that you can expect to see at these habitats. So first off, let's start with an overview. So the habitats at Still Pond that we have that we can determine are forest, meadow, sky, pond, wetland, and edge zones. So forest, which covers the most area in Still Pond. So that's where you're going to get a large diversity of woodland birds. In the meadow, you can get species such as my dad mentioned earlier, bluebirds and swallows. And in the sky, you're going to get raptors, flyovers, and other things. In the pond, you'll get quite a variety of species. You can get skulking birds such as the yellowthroat. You can get herons like the green heron that we're going to talk about later. You can also get ducks. You can get red-winged blackbirds. There's really a tremendous variety of species that can be found in and around pond. And wetland is that's sort of the area around the pond, I suppose. So yeah, in the wetland, you can see those kinds of species as well. So that would be like the marshy area around Still Pond at Still Pond Preserve. And then finally, the edge zones are the areas in between forest and meadow. And these zones also typically have, or typically are pretty productive. There are certain species that you are more likely to see in the edge zones themselves than in a specific habitat. So, for example, some species of warblers may be more prevalent in edge zones rather than just in deep forest. And for locations, we have the canopy, the mid-levels, the understory, and on the ground. So in the canopy, obviously is the highest part of the forest where you have to crane your neck to see things. The mid-levels and the understory, the next two categories, these tend to be more productive. You get a greater variety of things that you'll see in the mid-story and in the undergrowth. And then directly on the ground, you also see some particular things such as perhaps swamp sparrow or maybe a cardinal. And then finally, the season the season of that this presentation is based on is in spring. So essentially, the checklist that I will present to you today is going to be a checklist of species that you would typically expect to see in the spring. So that's important to keep in mind when you go to Still Pond in like the winter or the summer, and you may see a different set of species than mentioned on the checklist here. But you also may see some of the same year-round residents mentioned on the checklist. So your common woodland residents like the blue jay, the cardinal, etc. Okay, so first up on the list of habitats that we're going to talk about today is the still pond and vicinity habitat, which is indicated here by this blue circle on the map. And so the characteristics of this habitat are forest clearing, especially directly around the pond. You also have still pond itself with its tall perimeter grasses. And finally, you have marshy wetland, which again is more so directly present around still pond itself rather than, for instance, up here, which is more just deciduous woodland without any form of water. Okay, and now I'm going to talk about our list of selected still pond and vicinity species. So first up on our list is the red-bellied woodpecker. So the red-bellied woodpecker is a medium-sized woodpecker that primarily lives in wooded areas. This woodpecker is a common year-round resident. So if you go in the winter, if you go into spring, summer, fall, you have an equally good chance of seeing the red-bellied woodpecker. And the name red-bellied woodpecker itself is actually a misnomer. So the woodpecker has a red nape and a cap here, as you can see, but it only has a faint red wash on the belly. And as you can see in this picture, there's basically no red on the belly whatsoever. So yeah, the name itself is sort of a misnomer. And a couple other identification points are the black and white barring that you see on the wings and the white rump that's not quite visible in this picture, but it would be seen around here. The red-bellied woodpecker also frequents bird feeders, such as suet feeders. So you can watch for the red-bellied woodpecker, not just when you're walking around at Still Pond or one of the other land trust preserves, but even in your own backyard. If you have a bird feeder, you have a decent chance of attracting a red-bellied woodpecker. Okay, and second up on our list is the black-capped chickadee. So like the red-bellied woodpecker, the black-capped chickadee is a year-round woodland resident. And so for identification points, note its black cap here and its white cheek. The black-capped chickadee also visits feeders fairly often. And finally, the black-capped chickadee often travels in mixed flocks with other small woodland birds, such as the tufted titmouse. Okay, and third on our list is a blue jay, which is it's a familiar woodland species, I'm sure, to most of us. So its bright blue body and its head crest make it pretty unique looking, and it often reveals its presence with harsh, raucous calls. And now I'll pull up an example of one of these calls here. So. We'll go on to eBird, which is the bird identification website that we talked about earlier. And if you were to try and search up a species, you go to the species toolbar and you search up the particular species. So in this case, we want the blue jay. And so you can see there's pictures of it here and a description here. And then there's also a collection of audio recordings. So throughout the webinar, I will be going onto eBird and searching up the names of specific species that I think are good for you to know the calls of, because more often than not, you'll hear them before you see them. So right, that's the example. That's an example of a blue jay call. So it's fairly raucous, and it makes it easy to pinpoint its location when you hear it walking around in the woods. So yeah, that's the blue jay call. Okay, and let's get back to the presentation here. Okay, so yeah, whenever you're walking around at Still Pond, be sure to listen for the blue jays' jeering calls coming from the canopy. And our fourth species is the pileated woodpecker. So the pileated woodpecker is our largest local woodpecker. It's mostly black with a flaming red crest, and it has white stripes on its head and neck, as you can see here. In flight, look for a crow-sized bird with black and white wings. So the pileated woodpecker is, it does resemble a crow when it flies. And a key way to identify it is its black and white patches on its wings. The pileated woodpecker is fairly common in deep forests. So at Still Pond, often you'll see it in one of the wooded habitats. And the pileated woodpecker often makes loud, resonating drumming calls, and it also makes a series of clucking calls. And so for this species, I'm also going to play the call because sometimes it's difficult to see the pileated woodpecker when it's there's shadows. It's dark. It's high up in the canopy, and you're just hearing it, but you don't know what it is. So this is the. Let me go back to our explore page. This is the pileated woodpecker call. Right. So yeah, the pileated woodpecker call is basically a rapid series of clucking notes. Okay, and we also have 4 more species that you are likely to see in the Still Pond vicinity habitat. So our 5th species is the common yellowthroat, which is a migratory species of songbird. The males are quite striking. They have a black mask and a bright yellow throat. The rest of its body is more olive colored. The female yellowthroat is somewhat duller and it doesn't have the black mask that the male has. And the yellowthroat is usually found in marshy areas with thick undergrowth, such as around ponds. So at Still Pond Preserve, at the right time of year, so let's say mid-May, you're fairly likely to see a common yellowthroat if you are walking along the boardwalk that leads to Still Pond itself. The yellowthroat often hops on the ground among dense brush, making it fairly elusive. So it's difficult to see most of the time. So whenever you see a shadowy figure moving around, hopping around in the undergrowth, be sure to stop and take a look because it might be a common yellowthroat. All right, our 6th species today is the green heron, which is a small dark heron. It has a purplish green back. It has a maroon colored throat, and it also has a dark cap. This heron can be seen around ponds and other bodies of water, and it usually stands still. It waits motionlessly for prey. And look for the green heron on or around Still Pond. So when I've visited Still Pond Preserve, the times that I've seen the green heron, it's been on Still Pond itself. It's just standing there motionlessly, biding its time, waiting for a fish or something or another to pass by. All right, so our 7th species is the red-winged blackbird. So the red-winged blackbird, it's a species of blackbird that inhabits marshy, reeded areas. So at Still Pond Preserve, you can often see the red-winged blackbird flying around and in the reeds that line the perimeter of Still Pond. The male red-winged blackbird is glossy black with red shoulder patches, like here, while the female is brown. It sometimes has a yellowish face, and it's heavily streaked. Red-winged blackbirds will often be seen in groups, vocalizing and flying around noisily. So this is an example of the red-winged blackbird call. So and for reference, this is a picture of the female. So you can see there's a massive difference between the female and the male. So let's listen to a call. Right, so that's the red-winged blackbird call. It's like a sort of it's a buzzy call. It's somewhat bizarre in the realm of bird calls. But so yeah, the red-winged blackbird is one of those species that you have a fair chance of hearing before seeing, which is why I played the call, because at Still Pond Preserve, I typically hear the red-winged blackbird as I'm walking towards Still Pond rather than seeing it. So that gives me a clue as to what I might see when I get to Still Pond itself. And our eighth species today is the scarlet tanager. The scarlet tanager is a colorful migrant that dwells in woodlands in the spring and summer months. The breeding male scarlet tanager is pretty unmistakable. It has this bright red plumage and contrasting black wings. The female too has black wings, but it tends to be more of a yellow olive color. And scarlet tanagers are, while they are found in wooded areas, you're more likely to see them around bodies of water in wooded areas, such as, in this case, Still Pond. Okay, and so that's it for Still Pond and its vicinity. That's it for our first habitat. Now we're going to move on to the Kelley Uplands. So the Kelley Uplands is an area of Still Pond. It's in between the vernal zone, which we'll talk about later, and it doesn't quite reach Still Pond. It sort of gets to its vicinity right around here, but it doesn't quite reach it, which means that you're going to see a set of different species here because the habitat is somewhat different. And the characteristics of the Kelley Uplands are mature forest. There's not as much undergrowth in the Kelley Uplands as you'll find around the vicinity of Still Pond, as well as in the vernal zone. The Kelley Uplands are also generally shaded, so you have these tall deciduous trees that sort of tower over you. And there's also some stone walls in the Kelley Uplands. Okay, and these are our selected Kelley Upland species. So we have 4 here. We have, first up, we have the American redstart. So the American redstart, it's a species of migratory warbler. The redstart is one of the most common warblers in the spring and fall. It occurs in large numbers in wooded habitats. The male is quite striking. It has a glossy black body, along with orange patches on the wings and tail. It also has a white belly. The female is gray and olive. It too, however, has patches, but these patches are yellow rather than orange. The redstart exhibits a rather peculiar flying behavior. So it flits very quickly from tree to tree, and it fans its tail in flight. So whenever you see something that sort of zigzags from tree to tree, and it's fanning its tail in flight, and it's fairly bright colored overall, you can be sure that it's a redstart. And look for this flitting behavior in the understory to the canopy, as the American redstart tends to be seen fairly high up. So our next species that we're going to talk about is the yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a species of small woodpecker. As with other woodpeckers, the sapsucker is a woodland resident. However, it's distinguished by its fellow small woodpeckers by the more extensive red coloration on the head. So you can see it has an almost totally red head, with the exception of these white stripes and of the white and black stripes, I should say. And as you can see here, this is another species of small woodpecker, the downy woodpecker. You can see there's doesn't have nearly as much red. It only has this tiny red dot on its head. So that's typically the key distinguishing factor that separates the yellow-bellied sapsucker from woodpeckers such as the downy woodpecker. So the sapsucker's plumage is characterized by, as I said, the red coloration on its head, and it also has this solid white wing patch here. So just a long strip of white on its wing. And its namesake, yellow belly, is like the red-bellied woodpecker. It's a bit of a misnomer. It's fairly difficult to see. So you can just see just a little bit of a yellow wash in this photo. And so the yellow-bellied sapsucker also has a fairly unique call. It's a nasal series of rising slurred notes. It's a little difficult to describe, so I'll let you guys have a listen. Right. So this is the yellow-bellied sapsucker call. Right, so you can see it's a series of sort of like slurred notes that kind of rise in pitch. Yeah, so that's the nasally call of the yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is the yellow-bellied sapsucker, as I said, it's fairly small, so you have a decent chance of hearing it before you see it. Okay, on to our next species. So for our 11th species, we have the Carolina wren, which is a common year-round woodland resident. It is more colorful than other species of wren, such as the house wren. So it's warm brown above, and beneath you have this sort of brownish orange buffy plumage. Right. And also note the bold white eyebrow of the Carolina wren that helps separate it from other species of wrens. The Carolina wren is usually found in dense understory, but when it is singing, it may perch out in the open, like in this photo here. The Carolina wren has quite a variety of calls, and so one of the more common ones is a fairly common sound that you'll hear when walking in the woods. So again, let me bring up a recording so you can have a listen. Actually, I can hear the Carolina wren calling from outside right now. So this is its call here. Right. So that's the Carolina wren's call. It's sort of a series of repeated phrases that last about a second or two. So yeah, that's it for the Carolina wren. Moving on to the downy woodpecker. So the downy woodpecker is it's a familiar woodland bird. It's the smallest woodpecker in our area. The downy woodpecker has distinctive black and white plumage that's only shared by the yellow-bellied sapsucker and the hairy woodpecker. Males have a red dot on their heads that females lack. The downy woodpecker can be easily confused with a hairy woodpecker, which is its slightly larger counterpart. And one key distinguishing factor between these two species is beak length. So the downy's beak is tiny. You can see that it's proportional to its head. The beak is very small. However, the hairy woodpecker's beak is proportionally quite a lot larger. It's about the length of the entire head. So if this was a hairy woodpecker, the bill would be around that long instead. and listen for the very short, abrupt pick call in the woods. So again, let me bring up a recording, because the downy woodpecker, you will often hear it before you see it, or you may not even see it at all, and you'll just hear it calling. So play a recording. Right. So that's the downy woodpecker's call, which is like it's a very short, high-pitched pick note. So listen for that when you're walking around Kelley Uplands in Still Pond. Okay, onto our third habitat, the vernal zone. So the vernal zone here is located in between Hicks Meadow, which is our last habitat, and it's located in between Kelley Uplands, the habitat that we just talked about. So these two circles roughly represent Hicks Meadow and Kelley Uplands, and situated right in between is the vernal zone. So how is the vernal zone different from Kelley Uplands? So the vernal zone in the spring often has vernal pools. So after a heavy rain, you will see these pools of water in the vernal zone. And some of the other characteristics of the vernal zone are its boardwalks, its dense shrubbery and undergrowth. And also at this small sliver of the circle, probably this much, this area is the forest and meadow edge. So right here, there's incredible diversity of species. You're going to get a lot of species that could be seen in Kelley Uplands or in the meadow. They may converge here. However, there are some species that will mostly reside solely in this one habitat, rather than in Kelley Uplands, which is generally is more wooded. So yeah. All right, and now our 4 vernal zone species. So first up is the red-tailed hawk. And the red-tailed hawk is a large raptor. It's one of the largest hawks in our area. It's often seen soaring high above meadows, forests, and other habitats. The red-tailed hawk is true to its name. So it has a fairly bright reddish orange tail here that contrasts with the rest of its body, which is brown. And when perched, if you have a view of the front of the bird, note its dark necklace. So the necklace here is a series of brown dark spots across the chest of the red-tailed hawk. And so this hawk has huge variation in plumage, but these 2 points, the reddish orange tail and the brown necklace, these 2 points remain fairly consistent across all mature individuals. Okay, and for our next species, we have the red-eyed vireo. So the red-eyed vireo is a migratory woodland denizen. The red-eyed vireo is olive green above. It has a grayish cap. It has a white eyebrow, and it also has a dark red eye. You can't see it too well in this picture, but this eye is actually dark red. It often perches high up in the canopy, and it sings a series of repetitive musical phrases that you can hear quite frequently in the spring and in the summer. So again, let me bring up eBird, and I'll play you a recording. It's a pretty familiar woodland sound in the spring, in the migratory and breeding seasons. So here we go. So yeah, it's a little, it's a passage from a recording of its song, but essentially, you want to hear for a series of repeated musical phrases, sort of monotonous after a while. And and also one more note before we move on to the yellow-rumped warbler. In the spring, the red-eyed vireo can be seen near other migratory birds, such as warblers. So it may not mix per se, or it does mix with these warblers, but it doesn't actually like feed with them. So whenever you see a group of warblers in the spring, there's a pretty good chance that there will be a red-eyed vireo singing from nearby, but it may not actually hunt and feed with this pack of warblers, but it is associated with warblers. Yeah. Okay, and next up we have the yellow-rumped warbler, which is a migratory species. It is found in woodlands, especially near open areas, such as this edge zone that you get, and in the vernal zone. The yellow-rumped warbler, it's characterized by a yellow rump here, as well as yellow patches on the sides here. Also, the yellow-rumped warbler has a black mask and a white eyebrow, as well as a white throat. The yellow-rumped warbler has thick black streaking on the breast as well. The yellow-rumped warbler's migratory pattern is somewhat peculiar. So in the spring, it sometimes arrives a month ahead of other warblers. So you get the yellow-rumped warbler basically the first out of any other warbler, along with pine warblers and palm warblers. But most the biggest wave of warblers usually arrives around a whole month after the yellow-rumped warblers come. The opposite, however, is true in the fall. The yellow-rumped warbler is actually one of the last warblers to arrive in the fall months. So the yellow-rumped, so for example, you may get a big push of warblers in September, and a month later in October, you get a wave of yellow-rumped warblers after the main wave has already passed through. And the yellow-rumped warbler is frequently seen in mixed flocks with other warblers, such as the aforementioned American redstart. Okay, and finally on our list of vernal zone species is the northern cardinal, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. So the northern cardinal, it's a familiar backyard bird to most. So it has red plumage with a black face, while the female is brownish and it has redder wings. The cardinal often appears near forest edges, such as those that you would find in the vernal zone at Still Pond Preserve, and it vocalizes quite frequently. So this is another one of those species where you may hear it before you see it. So let me bring up the call. So yeah, there's quite a bit of variation in cardinal calls, but they all have a series of notes that kind of go up in pitch, like slurs, and then a faster series of moving notes that are of lower pitch. Right, so that's it for our vernal zone species. And finally, our last habitat today is Hicks Meadow, which is characterized by its tall grasses, its evergreen islands, its stone walls, which are mostly found where it converges with forest, boundary habitats. So again, the overlap between the vernal zone and Hicks Meadow. So like this sliver of a circle here. And you also have a great vantage view of the sky from Hicks Meadow. And there's also an adjacent pond and wetlands in this area, which is it's more on the Silver Mine Road side, which is actually it's around here, I would say, on the map. Okay, and so these evergreen islands, you can actually make out some of the individual evergreen islands here. So these small evergreen trees here. Each one of these is an evergreen island, and here you'll find species. Actually, I went here a couple days ago and I saw a ruby-crowned kinglet here, which is not on our checklist today, but it's one of the species that you want to watch out for when you're birding in this area. Okay, and these are our final 4 species of the checklist. So these are selected Hicks Meadow species. So first up is the white-breasted nuthatch, which is it's a common woodland bird. It has a white face, a black cap, and sometimes, as you can see in this picture, a rusty belly. The nuthatch is usually seen creeping along tree trunks and branches, occasionally doing so upside down, which is a very peculiar behavior that you want to watch out for. That indicates that the bird that you're looking at is likely the white-breasted nuthatch, is this creeping behavior. A couple other species do exhibit this behavior. One, for example, is the black and white warbler. Yeah. All right, and so our second species in our selected Hicks Meadow species list is the song sparrow, which is a common sparrow in meadows, yards, and other open places. So the song sparrow has brown streaking on the breast here, and overall has mostly brown and gray coloration with a white belly. It also has a white eyebrow and a couple of brown stripes on its head. The song sparrow has a distinctive buzzy song that I will, again, pull up a recording of, because this song is one of the most common songs that you will hear when you're at Hicks Meadow in the spring, and especially this summer. It's a common summer resident at Still Pond Preserve. Here we go. So yeah, that's the song sparrow call, which is it's a buzzy series of notes that fluctuates quite a bit in pitch, as well as in certain parts of its song, the speeding between the notes varies. Okay, and so our third species that we selected at Hicks Meadow is the house wren, which is it's one of the smallest birds in our area. So when we're talking about the house wren, you look for this perked up tail here. So whenever you see the house wren, it will usually have its tail cocked like this. And the house wren, its plumage, nothing too special. It's, as you can see, it's basically a uniform dull brown here. The lightest areas being here at the throat, and also the undertail coverts. And yeah, that's it for the house wren. And actually, one last point: the house wren, the habitat is often in shrubs, such as those that you would encounter in Hicks Meadow, and you also sometimes see it in bird boxes, such as those that you would encounter in Hicks Meadow. Okay, and last but not least on our virtual bird checklist today is the American woodcock. So the American woodcock is an elusive inhabitant of meadows as well as forests. It is a short, stout bird with brown coloration. In the springtime, the woodcock is often seen displaying over fields. However, it is likely heard before seen, very likely, in fact. And you want to look for bursts of noisy flight when identifying the species as well. So actually, at Still Pond Preserve right now is a great time for the American woodcock. So at dusk and at dawn, if you were to head out to Hicks Meadow, you would have a very good chance of seeing one or multiple woodcocks displaying in the air. They have very unique calls that you will most certainly hear as well. So let me play these right now. So that's our first type of call. The American woodcock also has sort of like a dripping call that you'll hear when it's displaying in the air. So let me see if I can find that one. Yeah, the display one. So this first part of the recording, this is of wing twittering. So that's essentially the sound of the woodcock going higher and higher up into the air until it basically vanishes from sight. And then from this extremely high altitude, it begins its display. So you can see the calls are gradually getting fainter because it's going higher and higher up in the air. And this is sort of the distinctive dripping call that you'll hear right about this part. Yeah. And then as the dripping call gets louder, that's indicative of the woodcock. It's flying down towards the ground, and shortly after this call ends, the woodcock will fly to a different location on the ground and continue calling. Right. So, all right, that's it for our Hicks Meadow species, and uh, this is our overall checklist today. So just to organize it a little bit onto one slide. So this is our still pond and vicinity species. And I've also numbered the species as well as locations on the map. So these are sort of arbitrary. You don't have to see these species at these exact locations on the map. And also, it's certainly possible for one of these species that, if I said it might be seen in Kelley Uplands, it could certainly be seen in the Still Pond vicinity area. So it's not like these species strictly remain in these areas. These are birds. They move around. They fly, after all. So no, they're not going to be staying in the same area all the time. So don't be too surprised when you end up with let's say you get a red-bellied woodpecker, which is well, we said this is here in the Still Pond vicinity. Don't be too surprised if you see it somewhere in this location, like in the Kelley Uplands, for instance. So yeah, these are, just keep in mind that this is somewhat arbitrary, the exact locations of things. This is just to give you an idea of what to expect were you to go bird watching in these habitats. So yes, this is our overall checklist here with the different habitats underlined in green. Okay, so that's it for our virtual birding portion of the presentation, and now my dad will take over from here.
Hi, I think I somehow went into a different spot in the slideshow. Bear with me, everyone. Okay, back to eBird. So yes, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, Cornell Lab of Ornithology maintains the eBird website, and the address for that is ebird.org. We have a few screenshots here, but I think what I will do is I will walk you through the website itself rather than go through the slides, which we're glad to make available to you later. So now on the eBird website, Avery's been showing you a lot of the Explore feature. Log me out. I would like to just quickly show you exploring regions, in particular hotspots here. So this is a map of the world, and it is a heat map. So those red colors are the most species diverse locations from the map. We'll bring ourselves back home here to Still Pond Silver Mine Preserve. And hotspots are basically pins on the map. And the bright red ones are the areas near us that have the most species. And in Connecticut, those tend to be along Long Island Sound. So that's where you would see the kind of terrestrial bird species, but also the shore bird species and even vagrants that might stop by in migration or due to storms. So you'll see here Still Pond Silver Mine Preserve has 92 recorded species. It is not, however, the highest count in our town. That would go to the New Canaan Nature Center, which is here, and you can see 152 species have been recorded at the Nature Center. Another good birding location in town that's cleared the century mark is Waveney Park at 110 species. And so back to Still Pond, you can see is not far behind. If I click on View Details for Still Pond, you'll see a checklist here. And this is a good way to research where you might like to go to birdwatch. You can go and explore hotspots, see what others have been seeing in the area. So today we see Frank Gallo, who's one of our distinguished naturalists, resident in town, put up a checklist today. And you can see he saw some of the things that we talked about. The red-bellied woodpecker is here, the black-capped chickadee, the white-breasted nuthatch, but he saw a barred owl, so that's always a treat. So Frank saw a barred owl today. And then if I'm going in this, I'm scanning for those migratory species. What are some things that might be coming in seasonal? Northern flickers are getting more active. The eastern phoebe a couple days ago. So I won't click pass through here, but if you did want to go on to mallard, you go back to what Avery was showing you earlier about species exploration. So eBird is it's a free to set up an account to it. You just go and create a login and a username. Within this, you can see, in this case, you can see my checklists and data that's on there. You can explore species maps. So this is a massive citizen science project, and they take all this data that people post around the world, and they get indications of migratory patterns, population fluctuations. It's something that we're using in New Canaan both to establish a baseline of what species are present in our community, and then over time, are species numbers fluctuating due to climate change or development? So it's a very useful research tool as well. And that's why we wanted to introduce you to this website and learn a bit about how easy it is to post. Just before we open to questions, I want to go back to our presentation because in addition to the eBird website, there is also an app. So I will just bring you to that. So you can download here through the App Store the eBird app on the left side. And it's this one, eBird Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Merlin Bird ID is another good birding app. And once you have downloaded that, it's quite simple to just start a new checklist here. And you can see it will give you your date and your start time. And then once you enable the start checklist, you're off to be able to post real time as you're moving through a location. So here, what you would get is you'll be shown a list of indicative species in your area. So it picks up our GPS coordinates and where we're at, and then you get this likely species based on 394 checklists within a 20 by 20 kilometer area. And so here, this is just a sample of how that might work. So you'll get a drop down of the likely species. You can just click the plus sign and add something. If you click more than once, you can add additional. So if you're seeing a flock of birds, you can record not just your species list, but your overall count, which is again of scientific value in terms of what are the numbers passing through. You can also add comments in this as well. So if you see something like flyover or unusual behavior or identification details, there's a space to add that. These little circles here that look something like identifications from a Consumer Reports magazine, this is whether something is relatively common or rare at that location. So if you're seeing a brown thrasher at Still Pond, I don't believe that species has been seen there. So eBird is giving you a little pushback is, did you really see a brown thrasher species? And sometimes if you click on something unusual, it will challenge you again, like you'll have to give additional information on how did it look, how did it behave. It is possible to see something that's not from our part of the country or world around here, but eBird is prompting you to the more common species that you might be seeing. When you get to the end of a checklist, you can click this stop button at the bottom. You can see here also a total. The number 4 at the bottom is the number of species that you have seen for the day. And Avery and I gave you a species count of 20 birds, because I'd say in New Canaan, that's a pretty good day out. You can hit 20 species pretty well. To get 50 species is a really big day for New Canaan. And why is that? Is because we don't have that coastal habitat. But if you go down to Westport or Stanford or Greenwich Point, you can achieve 50 species. If you do your research on hotspots, you can find sometimes someone has a big day and they might hit 60 or even 80 species at some of these coastal locations in Fairfield County. After your checklist is ready to submit, you can pick the location from hotspots that have been created, or you can create a new hotspot as well. And we encourage you to do that. You can create a personal location, which could be your own backyard. So that's the end of our main presentation, and we'll stop here to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you guys so much. That was incredibly informative, and I'm sure our audience learned a lot. As a reminder, it doesn't look like anybody's used the Q&A feature yet. So if folks in the audience do have questions, feel free to type those in, and I'll read them aloud. Maybe while folks are typing questions, one of the things I find really fascinating about the eBird app is those sort of migration maps. I was wondering if maybe while you've got the screen share going, you could pull some of those up. It's actually a tool I use every now and then. A volunteer or a visitor or a board member will say, oh, I think I saw this, like it's kind of early in the migration. And what I can do is go to those bar charts there and see sort of when the earliest of a given species might be arriving. So I don't know, maybe we'll pick a favorite migratory bird and see if they're in the area yet.
Let's see what I can go here. Fairfield County. And okay, the geese. So I'm going to move through this. It's
yeah, the geese are always here.
The geese are first. Canada geese, we know where to find them. Yeah. Let's come the rails. Yeah, that's how eBird is laid out, which is good. You can see the geese and then the shorebirds, and the warblers are quite a ways down here. Tern, shearwater. Flycatchers, vireos are interesting. Okay, All right. So let's see. Avery mentioned the black and white warbler. So here you can see it's just starting to flex here April, May, this bulb. And then it tapers off a bit as they continue to go northward, northern New England up into Quebec and Ontario. And then you have another peak here, September, October. So this is a pretty clear barbell shape.
Yeah, so that's almost one more tool that folks can use if they think they saw something. This will give an indication of whether it's in the area or possibly not, depending on when they saw it.
Right, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the squares also indicate the quantum of what might be passing through. So you can see here Tennessee warbler, prothonotary warbler. Prothonotary warbler is quite a find in our area, so it's something that may be mixed in with other species, but it's relatively rare around here.
Perfect. Well, yeah, we've got some questions coming in from the audience. The first one I'll answer is inquiring about whether the slides will be shared. We'll send an email out to everybody who registered for this presentation with the slides, and hopefully also a link to the recording for this video, so that in case you need to go back and reference or share with a friend, that will be available. So thank you for asking. One other question: do the bird calls vary from male to female? Maybe that's one for Avery.
Yeah, Avery, I'm gonna start with that.
All right. I think typically the calls don't vary too much from male to female. In fact, in some species, you'll get a duet between a breeding pair, a male and female, and the calls from each individual sound pretty similar. So I think for the most part, there's not too much variation between the calls between male and female birds of the same species.
Okay. Thank you. And then maybe this one's more for for Noel. Thinking about the eBird app, what do the folks at eBird think about counting birds at backyard feeders? Is that okay? Should we be including those, or is that sort of an artificial thing that we should be recording somewhere else? Maybe.
I think it's okay. We have a personal location where we live, and because sometimes you may see something unusual that's just passing through, which they do. We're fortunate here in New Canaan that even outside of the Land Trust preserves, there's a lot of green space, and you can just create a pin at wherever you are. I've even created a pin like frequently on the Merritt. You'll see wild turkeys along the embankments there, and I think it's okay. A sort of like to paraphrase Dr. Seuss, a bird is a bird, no matter how small. So if you're seeing it near your house, that's fine.
Awesome. Another question was, what time of day would you recommend for newbies to go out if they want to get started birding and see the most activity?
Avery, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So usually the best times of day for bird watching are dawn and dusk. Mid-morning, or I would say from dawn to mid-morning is usually the sweet spot for birding. You get like the tremendous variety of things at dawn, especially in the spring and summer months. Yeah, at dawn you can hear the dawn chorus of like a dozen different species at once. It's pretty incredible. So yeah, I would say from about dawn to mid-morning is the best time, and I find that when the day is at its hottest, like let's say early afternoon, usually tends to be slower going for bird watching. The birds are not too active because it's so hot. But yeah, that's my answer for that one.
So the early bird does get the worm.
Yeah.
Let's see, going through the questions here. This is more of maybe a habitat question. Do woodpeckers always need dead wood to peck? I guess the alternative being, will they peck on alive trees also? And can you discern species by the way or they're pecking or the sound or the pattern or anything like that?
Okay, I guess I'll take this one again. So I've definitely seen woodpeckers pecking on live trees. But I think it is more common for you to see woodpeckers pecking on dead trees. I don't have an exact reason why this is, but it's probably because dead trees have like decaying wood that's softer and easier to peck through, peck holes into, and look for insects and grubs and whatnot to eat. So no, they don't always need dead wood to peck, but I think they prefer it because it's easier to get a meal from trees that are dead.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and that's one of the reasons the land trust tries to leave dead trees on our properties whenever possible, is because I think I've read studies saying that there's more life supported by a dead tree than by a living tree, just because there's more insects and grubs feeding on the dead wood, which then support more birds, and there's just a whole sort of even more robust food chain possibly from that dead tree than alive trees. And then the second part of that question, which you might not know the answer to it, I'm not sure if there's any research done into this, but do different woodpecker species peck differently, or is it all just kind of they're going at it?
Um, so I guess the best answer I can give to this question is that the larger woodpecker species will have louder, more resonant drumming, whereas the smaller species like the downy woodpecker, the drumming is not going to be quite as resonant. It's going to be somewhat quieter. So I guess just in terms of the amount of sound that is produced by pecking, yes, different species do peck differently.
Cool, good to know. It's a question for your sort of birding experience. What's the rarest bird that you've seen in our area? And maybe I'll follow that up with where was it?
Right, yeah. So the rarest bird I believe that we've seen in our area, it's the scissor-tailed flycatcher. So that was a rare vagrant that we saw up in, I think it's Weston at Trout Brook Valley Conservation Area. It's one of the top 20 hotspots on eBird. So yeah, we were up there in the meadow, and then we came across a bird that we had no idea what it was. And then we took pictures frantically because, you know, we thought this might be something rare, something that hadn't been seen in a while. And it turns out we did a little research afterwards, and it turned out to be the scissor-tailed flycatcher, which apparently hadn't been seen in the county, or at least reported on eBird, in nearly a decade. So that was a pretty big find for us. But actually, funnily enough, the next day afterwards, all the top birders went back to the location and none of them saw it. So it was, yeah, it was a one-time event basically, just that afternoon.
I don't know if you can see, I'm just sharing one of the photos we took of this up at the Trout Brook Valley. And you can see here the how it got its name, the scissor-tail flycatcher, which is more of a native of Texas and the south central US. Not something we see too much east of the Hudson River.
This ties into another question that's popped up. Somebody interested in sort of what resources they can find for bird activity, whether there's local columns or if there's a way to use eBird to find those particularly rare sightings and figure out where they were so that you can go find them, or what resources can folks use to kind of figure out where they might go to see something interesting or unique.
Avery, do you want to start with that? And I'll bring up something on eBird that it may help to answer that also.
Yeah, so I would say for the most part, I usually get informed about rare species that have been seen in the area just by looking at eBird. I just sort of filter through the checklists, and if there's a species that let's say I haven't seen before, or it's rarely seen, that's sort of how I am aware of its presence in the area. Uh, Dad, you want to maybe finish that?
Sure. No, so I've brought up here on eBird Fairfield County. So to give you some more data points, 392 different bird species have been seen across Fairfield County. And this is not real time, but it's pretty close. So you can see postings today. Frank Matlick, who's another one of our distinguished naturalists and active with Grace Farm in their programs. And so you can kind of see what people are seeing, the count, and the location. You can click on these and learn about new hotspots or places you might like just to go and take a walk. Collis Huntington State Park we've been to, that's up in Reading. That's very nice. You can see bobolinks out there in their meadows. We've not seen a bobolink in New Canaan, but you can just going a little further upstate. So this is this is a pretty good way to just see what this happens. You see last seen, so the most recent time someone has seen a species. But if I click on first seen, this will bring up the things that may be more unusual or rare. So a first seen, well, it wouldn't be cardinal because cardinals we see every day, but a king/common eider, well, the first time anyone's ever seen that in Fairfield County was the 25th of February, right? And again, a lot of these you can see are going to be shorebirds, golden plover, and hybrid species. So neotropic cormorant, okay, and where? So this is a good way. First seen, if you're looking at this, that's something that the really serious people will get in their car and drive. You know, they'll go out to Willimantic if there's an unusual thing that's off course. And then last seen just gives you an idea with the season. So this is a chronological list here. So as Avery said, eBirds is really good for that. You get real-time data.
Awesome. Let's see, we've got two more questions that I'll try to squeeze in here. The first is sort of a technique when you're going out and looking for birds. Is it best to sort of sit still in one spot for a while and see what comes out? Or do you tend to just kind of meander through and walk around and see what you find? What's the best technique that folks can use to see the most things?
So there are different types of birding. There's stationary birding and traveling birding. So I think stationary birding is most productive along the shoreline because at different times, or I guess at slightly different times of day, I guess different tide levels and all, you will get different species of shorebirds and seabirds like ducks and just those one-off flyovers, something, if a strange raptor flies over or something, then you'll be able to see it pretty quickly because you have a good vantage of the sky. And I find that staying still at one location in the forest, it's more difficult because first of all, it's not as open, so you don't have as great of a view of whatever you're looking at. So I think it all comes down to whatever habitat you're in. If you're in an open habitat with good views of the sky and a shoreline or marsh or whatever, then stationary birding is a decent idea. But in like forested areas, I think the way to go is walking around. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. And then last question here, this one's a bit specific and maybe an ID question. Last summer, there were swarms of birds in the trees at the back of the lawn at Waveney, sort of near the meadow, and they were very active at dusk. Do you have any idea what species they might be? The question says that it was hard to see any distinguishing features because they only came out at dusk.
Okay, I guess I'll take this one again. I would say possibly grackles. I think at Waveney, I've seen pretty large flocks of grackles before congregating in the trees. It's also a summertime bird, so the common grackle is the specific name of the species that it might be the one that you were seeing. I guess another possibility would be the American robins, one of our, I guess, most common woodland birds around here. But last time I birded at Waveney, I saw flocks of robins perched in the trees as well. So I think those would be my two options, and possibly a third would be the European starling, that they also congregate in pretty large flocks, and I've seen them at Waveney. So those would be my three options, just based on that information alone.
Awesome. Yeah, the starlings tend to congregate around my bird feeder and kick out all the other interesting birds.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much for this presentation. I learned a ton. I'm still trying to become a better birder, and this has been an amazing resource. I'm sure folks in the audience appreciated it as well. As mentioned, we will try to get the slides and recording out probably by tomorrow for folks who registered. And if you have any questions, feel free to reply to that email. And thank you guys again so much, Avery and Newell. It's been a fantastic way to spend the evening. And we really appreciate you taking us on that virtual tour of the Land Trust property and showing us eBird and all these other great tools. So everybody have a great evening, and we hope to see you out there birding.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.